Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, I'm going to be putting on my agricultural consultant hat. We're tackling a topic that, well, let's be honest, it isn't exactly glamorous, but trust me, it is incredibly lucrative. We're talking about circular manure management. The whole goal here is simple. We want to take what's traditionally been a messy, expensive farm liability and completely transform it into a massive financial asset. All right, let's dive right in. Look, are you literally throwing your farm's energy and money away? I mean, for decades, we've basically just looked at untreated manure as a giant hazardous waste problem. When you just let it sit there untreated, it spikes the biological oxygen demand in groundwater by up to 50%, not to mention the massive greenhouse gas emissions. But as an agricultural advisor, I really want to challenge that whole mindset. We need to stop framing this as a waste disposal issue and start seeing it as a massive, completely untapped resource reservoir.
3.8 billion tons. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering expected annual production of livestock manure in China alone. And globally, Asia accounts for the absolute lion's share. We're talking about a continuous, almost unfathomable flow of organic matter. If you mismanage it, yeah, it's an environmental crisis. But if we optimize the processing conditions, it is an absolute goldmine of bioenergy and nutrients.
So here is our executive roadmap for overhauling your waste operations. 1. Rethinking the manure asset. 2. Upgrading with digital tools. 3. Mitigating contaminants and PFS. 4. Harvesting economics and bioenergy. And 5. Scaling and developing nations. Starting with phase 1 of our audit, rethinking the manure asset. From liability to resource. You really need to think of this as a closed-loop digital economy. Imagine, if you will, a single piece of organic matter flowing straight from your livestock right into a biodigester, or maybe being used to cultivate insect larvae. That raw waste gets transformed into valuable food digestate, rich nutrients, and bioenergy, and then it feeds right back into your crops and livestock feedstocks. It's the perfect circle. But the real secret to making this work at a commercial scale? It's the data. You need robust databases and sensor tech to continuously monitor every single physical step of this cycle. Which brings us to phase 2, upgrading with digital tools, the tech stack. Okay, so what does this actually look like on the ground? Here's the tech stack we strongly recommend deploying. First up, near-infrared spectroscopy, or NIRS. This instantly checks your feed and digestate quality. Next, we use GPS and cameras to track livestock pasture conditions so you avoid overcrowding. Then, we install advanced gas sensors and e-noses, which are literally way more sensitive than a human nose, to catch precise odor emissions. And the most important piece? All this data feeds straight into machine learning models that can accurately predict slurry temperature and ammonia and nitrogen emissions before they even spike. Basically, you're predicting and neutralizing environmental risks before they ever become a problem. And what's the actual operational return on installing all that tech? Try 85.4%. That's the massive jump in cleaning efficiency researchers saw when they rolled out AI-driven robotic scrapers using reinforcement learning algorithms. And the thing is, integrating AI with smart sensors doesn't just save you on labor costs. By keeping those barn floors highly efficient and meticulously clean, they drastically reduce methane and carbon dioxide emissions right at the source. It's a total game changer. Now, obviously, we can't responsibly talk about reusing waste without tackling the liabilities. So let's look at Section 3, mitigating contaminants and PFAS, risk management protocols. The absolute crucial thing here is understanding what actually threatens the safety of our fertilizer. We have to talk about PFAS, per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are super persistent synthetic chemicals, usually found in industrial products, because they're heat and water resistant. So how do they end up on the farm? Well, crops grown in contaminated soil get used as animal feed. The livestock eat it, and boom, it accumulates right back into the manure. If you take that untreated manure and spread it on your fields, those chemicals disrupt the soil's microbial balance, alter mineralization, and severely threaten your soil organic carbon stability. As your consultant, I literally cannot stress this enough. You have got to have actionable protocols to stop this. Step 1. Rigorously monitor your livestock feed sources to keep PFAS and heavy metals out of the diet in the first place. Step 2. Manage your soil pH like a hawk. You want to target pH right between 5.5 and 7.0, because if your soil drops below a pH of 5 and gets too acidic, heavy metals suddenly become highly mobile and incredibly toxic to the environment. And step 3, For heavily contaminated waste, you've got to use advanced thermal treatments. The data actually shows that processes like pyrolysis or incineration can hit over a 90% removal rate for PFS. Okay, once those contamination risks are neutralized, we get to the fun part. Section 4, Harvesting Economics and Bioenergy. The bottom line. Let's break down the actual lucrative byproducts we can extract here using targeted technologies. Say you implement scrubbing technology. You can extract ammonia sulfate, which is huge for fertilizer and water treatment. Craft pulping lets you pull out lignin, a key ingredient for bioplastics and carbon fibers. Microbial fermentation gives you polyhydroxyalkanoids, really valuable biopolymers. And pyrolysis turns what used to be pure waste into bio-oil, biochar, and volatile organic compounds that you can use right on site for energy production. The big takeaway? Processing waste isn't just some regulatory chore. It's creating multiple brand new revenue streams for your whole enterprise. And this adds up to some massive macroeconomic savings. Think about the harsh realities of global supply chains lately. Global inorganic fertilizer prices skyrocketed by at least 40% between 2020 and 2022. Relying on imports is just insanely expensive and volatile. But researchers found an incredible alternative. Turkey, for example, could save $1.3 billion every single year in fossil fuel imports just by rolling out localized manure co-digestion. When you recover high-value agricultural nutrients and bioenergy right there on site, you're entirely bypassing those crazy global markets. But how do we actually make this work outside of wealthy, heavily subsidized markets? Let's look at Section 5, Scaling in Developing Nations, Global Operations. We've got to be honest about the operational bottlenecks holding back large-scale adoption in emerging markets. Take Africa, for instance, which currently imports around 90% of its inorganic fertilizers. The roadblocks are steep. First, those high initial tech and infrastructure costs completely shut out a lot of local farmers. Second, you have this fragmentation of uncoordinated small-scale biodigesters that just don't have the economies of scale to actually be profitable. Third, there's a huge lack of technical expertise and knowledge transfer on how to run these systems. And finally, ambiguous land ownership and liability legislation makes scaling nearly impossible, mostly because buyers are terrified of inheriting contaminated land. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are absolutely clear, actionable strategies to break through these barriers. Regional policymakers and enterprise managers need to launch targeted pilot projects to actually prove this works to local communities. To fix the fragmentation problem, regions have got to pool their resources and fund centralized, large-scale digesters. That brings the per-unit processing cost way down. Governments need to step up with smart incentive programs and subsidies so this can outcompete cheap, traditional fossil fuels. And crucially, we need clear, unified waste management legislation so investors and operators finally have some regulatory certainty. Which brings me to a final provocative question for you to chew on. Are you just managing a waste liability, or are you actually sitting on your farm's greatest untapped asset? The research makes it pretty undeniable. If you integrate the right digital tools, enforce strict protocols to handle contaminants, and use smart scaling strategies, circular manure management is literally the blueprint for the future of farming. It is time to completely rethink how we handle waste. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.